Good evening. It is now 7 p.m. and I would like to start the meeting of the Extraordinary Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 1st of November 2023. I would like to remind everyone present this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Item number 1, apologies for absence. I've received apologies from Councillor Duffin, who will be substituted by Councillor Tandy. Thank you for joining us. And apologies from Councillor Morris Cook, who will be substituted by Councillor Kent. Thank you, Councillor Kent, for substituting. Are there any other apologies for absence?
No, Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much. Item 2, urgent items of business. I have not agreed to any items of urgent business. Item 3, declarations of interest. Does anyone wish to declare a declaration of interest? No. Okay, thank you. Item 4, call into Cabinet Decision 110667, Asset Disposals Programme, recommended next tranche of properties for disposal. This is our first call-in report this evening, a call-in from Councillor Green. Unfortunately, Councillor Green is unwell, so is unable to attend this evening, but has submitted a statement that I will read on Councillor Green's behalf. I will then ask the portfolio holder in attendance to speak, and then I'll invite officers and other members of this committee. So the statement submitted by Councillor Green reads as follows. I was supposed to be here this evening to object to the selling of land in Purfleet-on-Thames, which is distrusted into 3 sections, but unfortunately can't make it. First being the Purfleet Medical Centre car park to be sold for potential ground rent. With the integrated medical centre project now up in the air and the HRSC is now waiting for a report, what next? Will they be happening? Will it be done on a smaller scale? No one knows. All we know is we are waiting, and a potential area for expansion could be the rear of the Purfleet Medical Centre, which could potentially house any future medical centre building. But with all this aside, expect people to pay to park in their hour of need. We're in a cost of living crisis, council tax and rent hikes. Residents cannot be expected to fork any further expenditure. The next piece is our 2 pieces of land are located off Water Lane and St Clement's Courts and Tank Lane and Purfleet Primary School. Purfleet-on-Thames has seen many developments over the years and no local infrastructure, which the long-anticipated regeneration was supposed to rectify. But unfortunately, just like the IMC, the regeneration is up in the air. I strongly object, and why is Purfleet-on-Thames potentially losing their green belt, the lungs of Thurrock? In closing, I ask you all to support my call-in and call on Cabinet to make the right decision. So that's on behalf of Councillor Aaron Green. I now invite Councillor Maney to speak.
Thank you, Chairman. The first thing I think I'd like to say is Councillor Green refers to this land as green belt. I want to be very clear: it isn't green belt at all. It's white land. I understand there will be parcels of land in many communities where it's sat idle for a time, and the local community may have taken it upon themselves to use it as recreation land. But this isn't recreation land. It has no such designation at all. It is, as I said, white land. It's a piece of land that the council has no use for. It's literally sitting there idle. We do obviously have a maintenance liability for it. And I think regardless of the reasons for us wanting to sell this in order to help us with the council's financial situation, really you have to ask yourself, should we ever retain bits of land like this which we have no planned use for? So I don't think there's a lot I can really say other than I support the disposal of this land because it's obviously going to produce a capital receipt which we desperately need. We have no identified need or use for the land, and even by selling it, I mean, Councillor Green automatically assumes that it will become a residential development. I think it may do. I can't understand why there would be much other interest in that, but it still has to go through the planning process. If there are trees on there that have a TPO, or there are any valid planning reasons as to why the land can't be developed or shouldn't be developed, they can be made at the planning stage. At this stage, it is just a piece of scrubland that the council has no use for, and I don't see any particular reason why we would want to retain it and retain that liability that naturally goes with any asset that we own. So I can only put to the committee that in my view, the call-in doesn't have much merit, and I think we should proceed to dispose of the land at a market value.
Thank you, Councillor Maney. Councillor Poll, I was just going to ask officers to come in, and then after that I'll go to members of the committee, if that's the case. So we've noted that you want to speak, Councillor Polly. I'd like to invite Mark Bradbury or Rob Large to speak on this item.
Thank you, Chair. Rob Large speaking. Can I just deal with one point in Councillor Green's objection, where he talks about the land being sold in 3 sections. On the plan, there's a small piece of land which did say ground rent sale ? That's an old note from asset management, and I apologise, it shouldn't have been on the plan, but the aerial photograph shows it correctly. There's no proposal to sell the strip of land that provides access to the NHS centre and car parking, nor to give a right-of-way to the land over that. The only right-of-way to the land would be from the St Clement's Court road. So there was some misunderstanding about postcodes. We've got 2 postcodes referenced for the property. That's because being vacant land, it doesn't actually have its own postcode. So we've used both the postcode of the medical centre and the postcode of St Clement's Court. A Google search of the St Clement's Court postcode does cover a wider area, and I think some people might have thought it was another piece of land the council owned, which we haven't looked at yet and is some way away. Just to reiterate what Councillor Maney has said, this land we will be selling as one of the surplus piece of land as part of our asset disposals programme. It will be up to a purchaser to decide what they want to use the land for and then come forward in the planning process. We won't be giving any warranties on that, of course, and we won't be selling conditional on planning. It will be a piece of surplus land with potential, which would be sold at auction. If you have any other questions, please let us know.
Thank you very much. Any other officer comment on this report before I move to members?
Mark Bradbury speaking. I've nothing to add to Rob's summary of the current position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Polly, I believe you had your hand up to speak.
Thank you very much, Chair. And it seems I've been a little bit preempted by our officers here. They've touched on a point of clarity that I was looking for. We know that after these assets, the 9 assets that went on pink paper to Cabinet, where there was full council, we had 2 emails the following day from Democratic Services. One was forwarded from Mr Large that gave a table with the various sites and postcodes. Then the actual Cabinet report came to us, and on that there was different postcodes, which, as we say, part of that postcode is brownfield site. It's previously developed. It's quite so that I initially had a bit of a concern that the call-in wasn't valid. Looking closer at that paperwork, there's like a red map that's hatched in red, and as there's referred to as 3 tranches of land there. On the bottom of the report, it refers only to one of those reference numbers, not to all 3. So I may be diving a little bit too much into detail, being a bit picky, but I think this is a continuing problem that members have about information that is provided to us, the format that it's provided into us, the detail or lack of detail that is there, that it makes us, if we can't get the basics right, if we can't get the communications right, the officer time and member time that is spent in overview and scrutiny, if we're having to get this, if we have to delve into this much minutiae to actually know what it is we're looking at or we're scrutinising, I think is something that we have seriously got to look at. If we're not getting the fundamentals right, then we're very hard pushed to do our job effectively as scrutineers. But on this particular calling, I also had a question at full council regarding disposal of assets and about community buy-in. We know that Purfleet-on-Thames has been, as Councillor Green quite rightly acknowledges, has been for 20 years in the process of a potential regeneration, right back to days of Office of Deputy Prime Minister John Prescott, Thames Gateway development. It's always been, and the consultation and the buy-in from the residents in Purfleet-on-Thames has been I would think, one of the most constant. There are members of the public there that have stayed with the process, highs and lows and throughout. It always does give me a concern that we dispose of assets without then sort of securing some sort of agreement with whoever should take ownership of the land about then consulting with that community about what happens to what was a previous council-owned asset. And as I say, it was something that I brought up at full council for a particular site in my ward in Bellis, and I think all boroughs should be afforded the same courtesy. I just wonder, so if we can just have some absolute clarity on the parcels of land that are actually relevant to this particular cabinet paper, please.
Okay. Shall I go to the officer to answer? Yeah, would either officer in attendance or the portfolio holder be able to answer the point made by Councillor Polly, please?
Yes, if I can answer part of it, Councillor Polly. I can only apologise again, as I said, that on the plan, that strip of land that says ground rent sale again, that's incorrect. That should have been blocked out. So I do apologise for that. So it is the two parcels of land without that, as shown correctly on the Google Air photo above. So it is the two triangles of land, but without the land that goes over the NHS car park area.
Would you like to come back on that, Councillor Polly, before I open up to other members? No? Sure? Okay, thank you. And thank you for answering. Next to speak is Councillor Worrell.
Thanks, Chair. Just wonder what due diligence was done. I understand the asset list, and we've got some hard decisions coming at us, and we can't just say we don't want to sell every piece of land and asset. I just wonder what process was undertaken to identify this, and even though you've explained that, I still am not sure that I am fully clear of what we're agreeing to sell and not sell tonight, because I don't know every piece of scrubland or green space across Thurrock, but I do know that as housing, I had to fight for what somebody said is just a piece of green land that actually was a very, very well-loved community space, and only by mounting a great big campaign with the residents over in South Ockenden was we able to remove that piece of land. So I just wonder if we're setting a precedent to just say it's just a piece of scrubland that nobody loves or wants, and you know it's not well used. I just wonder what was done to identify that is something that should be sold. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Worrell. Officer, response, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Worrell. Yeah, I think it's fair to say that some of the early asset disposals under the 3Rs programme were put together quite rapidly and progressed to sale without extensive due diligence on what we actually owned, what covenants were in place, and what potential there was in planning or other terms. The current programme involves bringing forward tranches of property, small numbers of property in regular batches to Cabinet on the basis that we have done that due diligence to make sure that it is a site that we have the right to sell, we understand what the implications in property terms are of disposing of it. So we have a much clearer process. That process is shared regularly with the Finance Recovery Board and discussed in less detail at the Improvement and Recovery Board. So we do now have a process that the Commissioners support and those boards understand. The point remains, of course, that we are in a financial situation where we do have to dispose of these. Very often there will be ideas that if we hung on to it, this or that may happen. But we're not in a financial situation where that is as open to us as might normally be the case. I think it's worth pointing out that this property will go to auction. That means that anybody could attend and, if appropriate, bid for it, whether that is a community group, whether that is the NHS, if they were interested in possible future expansion or elsewhere. In terms of the consultation with communities about future use, then that would be a clear part of any planning process should a purchaser wish to change the use from white open land to any other use.
Councillor Worrell, please continue.
Yeah, thank you. So just going forward, so I kind of feel this may be well a test case, you know, that we had pink papers that went and, you know, and neither councillors nor community had any idea, which, you know, in this case is like forced a call in when it could have probably, some of this could have been sorted out well before, you know, we got to a stage where we have to have a special meeting. So, so going forwards, you know, will there be time for, you know, not just when the cabinet papers are published, for ward councillors and communities to at least put forward, you know, their objections to this stuff, because otherwise we're going to be sitting opposite you and Councillor Maney, you know, pretty much every month when an asset list, you know, comes forward and somebody don't want to sell something. Whoever's going to be, you know, in control of the council, the opposition, are going to just be calling stuff in all the time if there's not due process.
Thank you.
Yes, we have previously agreed, following conversations about the lack of transparency about those lists. Obviously, members do have access to pink papers, but that we've accepted that in this case there is no reason why we should have kept the details of the site. There are elements of what our aspirations are financially that are commercially sensitive and you wouldn't want to share with a purchaser. But the actual details of the site, we've now agreed that going forward those will be published in advance. The current intention is to do that with portfolio holders, shadow portfolio holder, through the FRB process and through the normal consultation of all cabinet reports in advance of publication. As you'll be aware, that process is now elongated from historic. So we will be sharing it much earlier and much more widely. But of course, if this committee were to make recommendations that we could do more, then we would listen to those. But there is certainly an intention now to share that information in advance of any decision with a view to avoiding situations such as this.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like that to be noted that in future, you know, it does certainly take a much longer process than just appear on a list. Thank you.
Absolutely, Councillor. Well, we'll get that noted and then make sure it's in the minutes for the next meeting. Any further comment on that, Councillor Wall? I'll move then to Councillor Gledhill.
Thanks, Chair. Oddly enough, I think both Councillor Wall and indeed Councillor Kent and I have had this conversation more than once in the past. We've been either been in opposition lead or in lead of council that there would be consultation with elected members at least, even if there is exempt aspects of it. And I've lost count of how many times we've had to bring it up again. So I think this needs to be beyond the line in the sand, but it just cannot sort of continue. But I've got a few questions on this, and it'll probably be officers that will be answering this, but obviously, you know, it may well equally be Councillor Maney. Is this area the part that's fenced off with the galvanised fencing on, I think it's Tank Lane and other aspects of it? Parts of it are actually completely fenced off. Is that correct? Am I correct in that assumption?
I think at least part of it is fenced off. I've certainly seen photographs which show part of the site fenced off. Whether the whole perimeter is fencing, I don't know, but certainly some of it has like palisade fencing around it.
Thank you. Palisade fencing was the word I was angling for. Which kind of gives the impression that it shouldn't really be used by anybody other than those with access to the land for whatever reason. Which kind of leads me on to the next part and touching on what Councillor Worrell was saying. Could this be called in as a community asset disposal process? So members of the community come forward with business plan, etc., 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 to be able to purchase this land and then administer it however they seem fit.
There has been no... Sorry, Chair.
Sorry, just repeat that, please. Sorry.
Yeah, there has been no approach from the community to register this as a community asset. We have a process for doing that. The council has previously had and continues to have a community asset transfer policy, but this is white land. It's not currently actively or officially used by the public. But as with any asset owned by the council, the community has the option to consider whether registering it as an asset of community value is something they wish to pursue. Obviously, we have a process to determine whether that is a valid application, and the community would have to show regular use in a formal way. But I don't think this is a site that one would normally consider for community asset transfer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Carry on, Councillor Gledhill.
Sorry, Chair, my apologies. It's always the thing that I sort of find a bit grey as to whether or not it can be classed as an area that is for community asset or not, because can't establish whether or not it's being used by the community in a formal way. But you just kind of answered that. I think Councillor Maney mentioned earlier that everything that, you know, if it's sold to a developer, just for argument's sake, it would have to go through the normal planning process, and that includes obviously working around or with any tree preservation orders. Do we know if there are any tree preservation orders on the site, or is it just one of these areas that happens to have trees, but they're not ones that are subject to a TPO?
Thank you, Chair. I'm not aware of any TPOs on it, but the trees would still be subject to the planning process.
Thank you. Carry on, Councillor Gledhill, please.
Thank you. So it is a shame that Councillor Green isn't here, but it seems to me, certainly from the speech, that pretty much everything that he was concerned about has been covered by either officers or questions in relation to the sale of the Perfect Medical Centre car park, which obviously has been made clear that it's not that. and we've covered that it's going to have to be part of a planning application if it's going to be moved forward in that way. Who's to know, someone might buy it and turn it into a park as a buy-off from some other development elsewhere, which would be very nice to see. So then getting on to what's on the call-in, we've got due regard for the individuals and communities served by Thurrock Council. I think Councillor Worrell covered that quite nicely, and of course now been covered by the, would it be subject to community asset disposal, and there's likely, unlikely situation. Due consultation in line with the Council's consultation strategy. Again, Councillor Worrell, I think, covered that quite nicely. And then the presumption in favour of openness. Well, we are in the open again. Councillor Worrell covered the openness aspects of it, and we've got assurance that going forward this would happen. This is an open meeting. I'm sure everybody in Thurrock's watching this with, much more interesting than watching Coronation Street or whatever's on this time of night. So I kind of feel that everything on the call-in has been covered. And the reasons for calling, whilst you can see, green belt, but it's actually white land and so on, whilst the heart's in the right place, perhaps the terminology isn't. And I would struggle to support it, whilst I understand the well-meaningness of it and the fact that, that perhaps the community, if they were consulted, they may well have been able to put in a community asset disposal application beforehand and so on. But from what I'm hearing tonight, I don't think that would have been the case anyway. It's a shame, but I think, it was a good shot, but unfortunately, the target wasn't there.
Thank you for that, Councillor Gledhill. Would any other member like to speak on this? So, listening very carefully to what everybody has said, obviously we have Councillor Green's statement, and then as I sum up, if anyone wants to take issue with how I've summarised it, then please just put your hand up and correct me. And obviously the portfolio holder who is here disputes the call-in, stating there's sort of no planned use of the land, and that the process should carry on as it is. Councillor Polly spoke about getting sort of, I think your term was nitpicky with it, but that's our job. You're doing the right thing, Councillor Polly. That's exactly why we're here. But you questioned sort of the lack of detail, the information provided, the minutiae, the potential regeneration and consultation with the community. Councillor Worrell questioning obviously the due diligence process, referencing the residents' campaign in South Ockenden that you led, and a quote you particularly said, which struck me, is seeing it as just a piece of scrubland. It's very sometimes different looking at a map in a meeting room to how it's perceived by residents out there. And obviously, when the officer response was, a lot of it was about the financial situation of the council as well, which obviously we can't get away from, but that does feature quite heavily in this. Councillor Gledhill, lots of really good points. Firstly, around consultation, asking direct questions around community asset disposals and tree preservation orders, and trying to get in to the weeds of it, which is exactly what we're here for. My own personal view is I can't see. Oh, sorry, Councillor Gledhill, please.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It was only when you started or summing up all your assessment of it, it suddenly occurred to me, we've mentioned the financial situation. What we haven't mentioned is government after government has highlighted that local government is sitting on an awful lot of assets, land, money, and so on, and they need to dispose of that. And both the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister previously, and indeed Lord Pickles, when he was Secretary of State, made clear that councils shouldn't be owning stuff they don't really need to be owning. So irrespective of the financial situation, which obviously is still front and centre, there would be absolutely no reason why we shouldn't have been disposing of this anyway, in line with government's plural instructions previously.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Watson in the gallery, did you have your hand up to speak? Because I'm minded to, because you're a member of this council, you're also a ward councillor for the area affected. So if you'd like to speak on it, you can, as long as you take a seat and everything you say can be minuted, etc. Yeah, absolutely, councillor. It's just so that the public can hear what you're saying and it can be minuted clearly. But I'm happy for you to participate on your interest in the matter and your ward and all that sort of thing. So over to you, councillor.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee and also the officers and Councillor Maney to allow me to speak. Is in relation to the call-in, and I totally understand and hear what you're all saying, but on this piece of scrubland, which people can say is scrubland on which in one sense, but in another sense, it's actually where somebody goes and walks and takes their dogs and enjoys some sort of recreation, whether we think of that or not. But it's more important than that. It's more in depth than that. And for me, it's this. Perfectly on Thames has already committed to 3,000 homes through the PCRL Regeneration Limited. Even if that doesn't continue, what it will do is some parcels of land will still have those homes. We were supposed to be getting an IMC that has now been put on the back burner. We are supposed to be getting another primary school that is not coming through. We have sold the Rosa site to somebody at the moment that's renting it out with the potential that when the market goes up, we'll be then doing more homes. Can you see that Perfectly on Thames does not have the infrastructure, the shopping, the shops, nothing, and we're just making it into a concrete jungle of over and over again of housing. For instance, the health centre is used by all over, and we're talking about taking some of its car park. The other thing as well with the health centre is people may not know about is that it's actually cutting back its services for the doctors from 4 days a week to 2. That's a significant issue to my residents sitting within Perfectly on Thames as they currently are, without more going on. And this is without the 3,000 we've committed to. On top of that, there is a local plan that we're hoping going out to consultation that this isn't even part of. So can we just sit and think about bits of scrubland, which people think they are, being put over as an asset to be sold for whatever reason it being, just to think about the residents, the infrastructure, what we haven't got, what we need, and then we've got a local plan coming through the back way. So can we just sort of like take ownership of the land we got, think about it, and think about how that fits into our new local plan? So thank you for allowing me to speak. And hopefully you'll make the right decision. And it's not just about this piece of land, it's about any other bits of land disposal you've got coming through. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor, we'll just stay there for a moment because I'm going to ask for if Councillor Maney or if either of the officers on this case want to comment and, you know, in the interest of debate and openness. So just stay where you are for a minute, and thank you for that contribution. So I'd like to invite, you know, any of you to... Would you like to go first, Councillor Maney?
Thank you, Chair. I hear what Councillor Watson says. She raises some very valid points, but I think I would just go back to what we've been saying throughout the meeting, that this is about the sale of a bit of surplus land. That sale does not automatically equal houses. There still must be a planning process. We can't say with certainty that A, it will sell, and if it does sell, it will automatically be bought by someone who has an interest in developing it for residential purposes, and even if they have, that they will get planning consent. All of those very valid points that Councillor Watson raises will be considered during the planning process. For the here and now, we're simply saying that this is a piece of land the council has no use for. It doesn't appear in any of our strategies. We simply don't need it. What is the worth of retaining it? And as Councillor Goodhill said, you know, it isn't just councils in our position that are encouraged to sell assets or pieces of land they don't own. I question what sense there is in any local authority holding on to pieces of land like this when we simply have no use for it, and it could produce a capital receipt. So I go back to what I said. There will be a planning process if somebody did want to develop it, and all of those valid points should be considered at that stage. For the here and now, this is simply about the disposal of a piece of land we don't need. Just very quickly, if I might, Chair, in relation to, I understand that people may use it for recreation. I don't know. I'm told by the ward councillors they do. I think it's important to remember, if people are using it, where we have designated land for recreation, the council is therefore is under an obligation to make sure it's actually safe for that purpose. And I'd be a bit concerned if we just took it, we just accepted that it is being used for recreation, but then didn't take the necessary steps to ensure that it is actually safe for that. So I think, if anything, if the public are accessing this land, it kind of reinforces the need for us to dispose of it, because all the time it's there and people are accessing it. As I said at the very start, it does kind of raise a liability. I'd be concerned if we had parcels of land that were being used as recreation, we just accepted they were being used for recreation, but then we weren't ensuring that they're actually safe for that purpose. So I actually think it's more of a reason to dispose of it.
Thank you for that. Councillor Watson, like I have with everyone else on the committee, when they've had a response from either Councillor Maney or the officers, I've allowed them to come back if they want to. Is there anything you'd like to say to carry this on, or I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Maney. And I get everything you are saying, but I think the other thing we need to think about as well is where council has got land, especially sort of where it is now and where it's situated, and it, next to the Mardyke itself as well, the estate, that's where they use it, is that where we've got pieces of land that mean nothing to us, it actually means something to our residents. And especially when we went through COVID, we looked at green pieces of land, didn't we, as a way out, and a way that's where the health and well-being was going to be. So I still think that we need to consider in a more joined up way about stop just going on pieces of land just because of it, and start thinking holistically with the local plan coming in behind how we can use this more effectively. And I'm pretty sure that this piece of land that is being used at the moment can be paused until such a time. Thank you.
Would either Councillor Maney or any of the officers like to reply, or just take the comments? Councillor, I'll leave up to you.
I have nothing further to say other than I hear what Councillor Watson says.
Yeah, of course. Carry. Yes, you can.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to ask Councillor Watson a question, if she doesn't mind. I know how passionate she is. She's my ward councillor, actually, so I know how passionate and proactive she is in the ward. As I alluded to earlier, Purfleet-on-Thames has been subject to various master plans, regeneration plans for 20 years now. This piece of land has always been in council ownership, has been known by the previous development corporation, has been known, and nobody has ever included it in any of the master plans as a recreational piece of land, as a green space for the residents there. It's never come into the part of the 3,000 housing. It was never brought by the DC off of the council as part of their master plan. So, am I correct in my comments there, Councillor Watson? Is that right?
Yes, but that doesn't mean that we should build on it just because it's not been put into a master plan or it hasn't been put into any other development plan, should it?
But that was my point. With the amount of scrutiny that Purfleet-on-Thames has come under, and with the amount of opportunists and hope value and speculative applications that we've had in there, at no point in 20 years has anyone wanted to buy it or put houses on it. I mean, it's very close to the railway line. There's lots of brambles and it is overgrown. And that was more. I'm not saying it should be sold for housing. What I'm saying is a little bit of reassurance for perhaps members and for residents that in 20 years of Purfleet-on-Thames being very high profile in the development world, that piece of land has never had any application or any interest from any major parties. That was my point. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. And it's been a really good, robust debate and very good answers coming from officers, portfolio holders, and also us getting into the nitty-gritty of it. Just to continue my summary that I was doing, and Councillor Watson, Councillor Watson has obviously backed a lot of what Councillor Green said in his statement. The wider sort of infrastructure questions for Purfleet-on-Thames, but also bringing in the wider question of the local plan as well, which I think is really interesting point being made. My own personal view on this, if I was to do a word cloud, the words that are coming out a lot, the main word that's coming out is consultation, and that's from both people who are speaking kind of against the call-in and those who are speaking for it. That even those speaking for it, against it, are mentioning consultation. And there's also been the term that's been used a lot is unsure of the use. There's been no definitive answer around the current use of it, even you know, when the answers come out from portfolio holders and officers, there's an uncertainty about the use of the land. Looking at the principles to do with the call-in, the one that strikes me that Councillor Green ticked on here is due consultation in line with the council's consultation strategy. And being cautious as I am, part of me thinks we should kick it back to Cabinet to have another look at, because there's concerns from ward councillors, and it doesn't hurt to put this out into the open. It will come into a vote anyway, so if anyone is against that, they're free to vote how they feel with it. So there are 3 recommendations, and I think we should vote on all 3 of them out in the open, so that whatever's decided, we know where it's gone. So the first recommendation, we'll vote on 1 point. If we're happy to, are there any further comments? We're happy to move to the vote, because I think we've had a really good discussion. I think it's time to make a decision on this. So, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Gledhill.
Apologies, my voice keeps from going. I have no reason why. Yeah, so, I mean, there's 3 recommendations there, which we can either, so we do one, 2 or 3, effectively. So, whilst this would normally, you know, if it completely dropped here, then one would still expect this to go back to Cabinet to say it was looked at and they upheld your aspects. I think send it back to Cabinet, I think we'd need to be very clear. It says that set out and right in the nature of the concerns. I think not just the nature of the concerns, but I think also, and this is something that we very rarely got on Cabinet, was feedback from overview and scrutiny for whatever reason, but it's also the pros and again, the pros and cons. So I'm 100% behind you, indeed pretty much every single member here, about the level of consultation. I don't know what the level of consultation that's legally required by councils to sell a bit of land. It seems a little bit, we might have set the bar artificially high, but again, no expert on that. But I think if we're going to put the reasons forward on 1.1, which I was gladly back, is that we put everything forward.
I mean, I will bring in Councillor. I've noticed your hand up, Councillor Worrell, but my view on it is that we would actually make sure that Cabinet have had the full range of discussion, and also Councillor Maney is on Cabinet and will know the full range of discussion in here and what we've all agreed on, the things that have been in dispute, and in a sense, Councillor Glitter, what you've said has kind of convinced me even more, really, that we need to sort of push it to Cabinet to have another look at, but with the proviso that they know everything that we've discussed here, and that's what I'd be comfortable with. But thank you for that. And Councillor Worrell.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks for allowing us to come back in on this. So I started the evening with what due process, what consultation, and I'm glad that that's where we're ending, and that this is a test case. And by giving it back to Cabinet and saying have another look at it and making sure that we have consulted and made sure that that isn't a really, really well loved piece of land, that in future that will be done before we come to this. So just for that reason, I think that Cabinet should do that and make sure that we do go through the right processes, because I wasn't particularly one way or another, it's a piece of land, but to me, about principles, and if I don't feel that the principles have been followed, then I can't vote for something. And I don't think that the full principles, and this is like a lesson learned. Thank you.
No, thank you. And just before I come to Mr. Bradbury, the quote from yourself, which I've got nitpicking from Councillor Polly, but yours is test case. That's really stuck in my head, that this could be a test case for something. But yes, if you'd like to come in, please, sir.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to be clear on consultation. There is no statutory requirement to consult with the public on the disposal of assets. What we've talked about, and in my response earlier, what I've talked about is making sure that members are aware of what is going to be sold in good time, so that Cabinet can be aware of any concerns from members on behalf of their communities. In making the decision, there is no proposal to consult on every piece of land we sell, and there is no requirement to do that. What we've talked about is making sure that members are aware of what is proposed to be sold, so that any concerns they have can be fed through the decision-making process, and Cabinet can make a decision in the light of those.
Thank you for that. Very good comments. Right, yeah, and then after this, I think we'll sum
my
up.
apologies,
finally.
Chair, but every time someone says something, it's another set of questions in my head. So just for clarification, I'm not sure whether it'll be yourself, Mark, or the monitoring officer. So it says here, the reason for calling due consultation in line with the Council's consultation strategy. So if there's no requirement for doing that, therefore there's no part of the strategy that's required, would that part of the call-in then naturally fall as not being applicable? Because if so, then that kind of gets back to 1.1 and the nature of the concerns, and the nature of the concern being there's no consultation. If there's no requirement for consultation, it means 1.1 is invalid.
Right.
Unless I've not read it wrong.
Thank you. So, how I'm proposing this as Chair is that the call-in request based on due consultation in line with the Council's consultation strategy, and specific to this case, is to test member awareness of consultation, and to use it as a test case, in Councillor Wall's words, for how we dispose of these assets in the future. Because as it was mentioned, I think it was Mr. Bradbury mentioned the financial situation with it, this is going to be coming up a lot. And I think tonight could be a really good example of how we, as a committee, put everything out in the open and come up with a really good consultation process that really tests members' awareness of this. So, with the recommendations, if 1.1 passes, then the other two recommendations fall. If 1.1 falls, then we move to 1.2, and so on and so forth. So, I'm going to ask members to, all those in favour of, sorry, I need to read it aloud. 1.1, if it is concerned that the original decision in light of the call-in refer to the recommendation decision 110667 asset disposals programme, recommended next tranche of properties for disposal to Cabinet for reconsideration, setting out in writing the nature of its concerns. All those in favour of 1.1, please raise their hands. Anyone against 1.1? Any abstentions? Thank you. So 1.1 passes. Can I just thank you all for the nature of that discussion and the orderly and fraternal way it was done. Thank you. I would like to invite any sort of officer who's not required for the next item or portfolio holder. You are, of course, welcome to stay for the duration, but if you want to leave, I totally understand. Thank you. And no, Councillor, no, it doesn't mean you've got to stay for the next bit. So, item number 5, call into Cabinet decision Sorry, I shouldn't have done that twice. 110676, resources to support the council's budget. On to our second call-in report this evening. We have 3 speakers, Councillor John Kent, Councillor Spate, and the portfolio holder, Councillor Snell. They will speak in that order, and then we will hear from Councillor Snell and then the officers. And as with the last item, I will throw it open to a good-natured but robust debate. So, Councillor Kent, I'd like to invite you to speak.
Thanks, Chair. And I'll start by saying that I do understand probably better than most just how difficult it is to identify large savings from the Council's revenue budget. And the task of having to save £75 million over the next 5 years isn't one that any member of the Council takes lightly. And I just want to kind of make that clear, first of all. But I do feel that paying PwC a sum of £800,000 to identify 5.2 million is disproportionate. £800,000 is above 15% of that £5.2 million. I've also got to say that I was somewhat confused that on the 5th of October, at this very meeting, the portfolio holder said that progress on setting next year's budget, finding the savings for next year, were going well, and he said, and I quote, that the savings were very nearly there for next year, and £7 million had been identified for the year after. So I was kind of genuinely surprised when 6 days later, there's a late report that goes to Cabinet to say that actually we're at least £5.2 million short, and we need to get outside help to come in and identify those savings. I don't think that's reasonable. I think that the Council, in the financial situation that it is, needs to look to its own self first, and we should be looking to our officers and our members to identify these savings. So if we look at the chart, which gives you the various options, the option that we should have been looking at for the start is the in-house model of finding savings. And, you know, I kind of understand that the current administration has no track record of finding savings. What was it, 8 million last year against a target of 12 million, and for the 6 years before that, just a total of 2 million. So I understand it's not something that they find easy. But frankly, Chair, we shouldn't be looking to bring in outside agencies like PricewaterhouseCoopers extortionate fees to do our job for us. We should be doing it ourselves. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. And due to the next bit, I'll go to Councillor Spates next, and then allow officers and portfolio holders to respond to both of you. Over to you, Councillor Spates.
Thank you. And thank you for recognising the validity of my call-in application. I'm here because I watched this matter fly through Cabinet, where it was barely questioned, even though the questionable recommendation to appoint PwC had gone through no scrutiny. Councillor Snell has mockingly called me Mr. Angry, and too right I'm angry. But sadly, I'm also quite distressed with whatever the outcome of this is now going to be. If it goes one way, it effectively reinforces the belief, despite all that has happened over the past 14 months, that we remain financially illiterate as an authority. But if council members find reason to support the call-in, then we tacitly acknowledge that despite all the protestations to the contrary and talk of transparency, openness and honesty, our senior councillors and officers are not being truthful. It's an awful dichotomy, but I will explain why I'm here before you this evening, and to some degree it may be a repetition of what Councillor Kent said. At Cabinet, Councillor Snell said, "We've got a very poorly resourced finance team which have been working absolute miracles, and we need the assistance to make further savings going forward from that. We've got advice on our previous investments, our asset sales programme. We need advice. We don't have that expertise within the council. It's a case of making sure our savings programme is robust now, rather than we get a couple of years down the line, we don't bring in the expertise and we start to struggle. It's an £800,000 one-off spend to save £5 million every year for the next few years, I think that's a good spend. However, and I differ with Councillor Kent, because I will say it was 4 full working days, because the council loves to talk about working days. 4 full working days earlier, just 4 days, at ONS, Councillor Snell was asked about his confidence in the finance team and its findings. I specifically asked about his confidence. Speaking about the upcoming 24-25 budget and the saving required, he said, "We are actually pretty close to identifying 18.2 million, and we have identified, I think, it is 7.5 million for next year." He then turned to our Section 151 officer, Stephen Mayer, if that was correct, and Mr. Mayer agreed it was. So Councillor Snell then continued and said, "In terms of confidence, I think that we are nearly there this year and well on the way for next year as well. It's doable. It's not easy and it's not going to be easy, but all the directorates are pulling together to find the savings." Councillor Snell made no mention of poorly resourced teams at that time. He spoke factually with no mention that assistance was needed. And surely now the credibility of both Councillor Snell and worryingly our 151 officer is massively questioned because of those statements to ONS when they completely did an about-face just 4 working days later. I raise one other point. Throughout the financial debate at both ONS and at full cabinet, mention was made that PwC are currently working within the council. It was specifically mentioned that they were involved. I've looked through payments to suppliers that are supposed to be published at month end. We've paid nothing, as far as I can see, this year to PwC. Strangely, September's figures have not yet appeared, even though they should be there. So I don't know whether we've actually paid PwC any money, and I suspect that if we have and they're already working with us, there may well have been an agreement to work with PwC before it was even brought to Cabinet. I just don't know, and that's the point. I don't know, other councillors don't know, and the public or watching us with an eagle eye don't know. We've just broached everything that we said we would do with this decision, and it concerns me greatly, and I think it needs looking at from top to bottom again.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Spates. I will now invite Councillor Snell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors. Since the Section 114 and the BVI inspection, it's become very clear that we need to make significant revenue savings. We've been undertaking that process for over a year now, and I think I'm right in saying that PwC were working within the council even before took over the portfolio. So they've already been in situ helping us to identify ways and means of making savings and putting in systems in place to make that process more doable for the officers. The fact remains, and it's in the report, is that we did not and do not have the resources or the knowledge, more the point, within the council officer staff in finance. Bearing in mind we're also going through an SLT complete restructure as well, so there's a lot of change going on. We don't have the resources to do all of this work without some outside assistance. So it is crucial that not only do people like PwC come in and identify savings that we can make, but they pass on their skills and their methods to our staff so that we can learn from them going forwards and become a much more resilient and informed finance department. Now, in terms of everything I said at various meetings is true. Why it's astonishing that I can say that we're very close to making the 18.2 and then suddenly, just because we need additional help, that suddenly that previous statement's not true is beyond me. I don't understand where that comes from. You know, we are going to have to make significant savings year after year after year. And quite frankly, we need help to do that. That's made very, very clear in the report. Now, there's not a lot I can do if Councillor Spate is calling myself incompetent and the officers incompetent. Frankly, that's Councillor Spate's default position on most councillors and officers, as far as I can tell. But the facts are the facts. We do need the help. And it seems to me prudent that we get the assistance in, as I said previously, now, so that we are fully specced up with how we need to go forward with making these savings and organising ourselves, than to not do it. You say that we looked at whether we could do this in-house. We couldn't. Then we looked at, well, maybe we should completely outsource it and let an outside body do everything. Well, that didn't make sense. It's far too expensive, and then, there's no crossover of learning. It becomes compartmentalised. So this is why we went the way we did. So PwC come in, they work with our team, and there's crossover with everything, and everybody gets to learn from PwC, new skills and to equip themselves for the future. I think that's prudent. I think that's the right way to go. Now, I'm sorry you don't agree with that, but I think it's the way to go, and I will maintain that is the way we should be doing it, and I will stick by this report, and I therefore reject the calling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Snell. One more speaker. I'd like an officer to comment, Mr. Mayor there, and then after that, I'll throw it open to members.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all appreciate the magnitude of the financial challenges that the Council faces, and which the member has acknowledged. With the exception of one other council in the country, this is absolutely unique, and we need experts in several areas. So we are divesting ourselves of our investments. We are employing advisors, if you've seen in the report that we've put to Cabinet and Council, to assist with that. We are also selling our assets to pay down our debt, as colleagues previously have referenced, and we have employed advisors to assist with that. The third strand of what we are dealing with at the moment is a reduction in the capital programme that will come to members in February and go to FRB in November for consideration. We have, as a team, managed to drive that through ourselves, so we are selective when we use advisors. Revenue is a smaller number, but is generally a more complex position because it involves services, and as Councillor Snell has said, we absolutely need support in that. The target that we have set and worked with PwC is to get robust delivery of the 5 million. Equally, we also asked that they move into 25-26, and that will bring a further £4 million of savings towards that. Equally, as Councillor Snell has said, there is a lot of learning. These people, these firms work with many authorities. They bring knowledge and ideas from lots of papers. Colleagues pick them up. And therefore, we have 75 million approximately to find. This will assist in the future. Not specifically, but it brings awareness, it brings new approaches, and colleagues within the council will learn from that and develop that. So the benefit is beyond the 24-25 for the council as a whole. It is essential that we have this support. We can deliver the budget, as Councillor Snell has said. You will see that at scrutiny on the 28th of November and scrutiny again in February. But PwC, as do other firms, bring a rigour that most councils themselves do not have, and we learn from that and we use that as appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Kent. Councillor Kent.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I am grateful for those responses, and I kind of accept a lot of what Mr. Mayor has said. I think the difficulty that I have is almost with Councillor Snell's confusion. The reason that we are astonished is that on the 5th of October, you're telling us that we are very nearly there, and then 6 days later, we are £5.2 million away. I also understand the bit about wanting to bring in extra resource. The report that came to Cabinet was a late report. you know, so you've suddenly decided that we need this extra resource. We set the current year's budget on the 1st of March this year, and we were told then that we would start immediately looking to set next year's budget and to look for the savings. We didn't need that extra resource all the way through March. We didn't need it through April, didn't need it through May or June or July, didn't need it through August, didn't need it through September. You then decide on the week of Cabinet that you need to bring a paper forward to bring in this extra resource. And, you know, I have to say, I understand the bit about next year and getting ahead of the game, but the report that went to Cabinet says, the executive summary, the council has to achieve £18.2 million of revenue savings for 24-25 by February 24. This is a major challenge and one the council will need immediate support to achieve. We can only call in the decision that was made, and we can only call it in on the information that was given on the night. And the information given on the night does not, I believe, lead to the decision that was made. I can only repeat, I've heard nothing that changes my mind. This is a disproportionate resource when it comes to finding the £5.2 million that you appear to be short of for setting a balanced budget for next year.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Would you like either an officer or cabinet member response?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think one of the things we must always remember with this is the whole situation has been very rapid, very fast moving. It was decided that we did need the assistance. We also have budget setting coming up, which is always going to divert resource from the savings programme as well. So rather than lose PwC, you know, they disappear off and go and help somebody else, we needed to absolutely tie them down into February and get the assistance that we do need. I mean, you're laughing, but, you know, we were close to the 18.2. It's, you know, PwC have been with us doing work with the council for the whole period. So it's sensible to retain that and get the knowledge and the assistance that they provide. You know, we're coming through a very, very busy period right now. We need all the resource we can to make sure we get this right. You know, this is what it's about at the end of the day. We've got a duty under the BVI to get this right. And we believe and we know we don't have the resource in council without assistance to do that.
Dr. Smith.
Chair, to try and assist with the discussion and the members' comments about this, I want to draw a distinction between the identification of savings and the deliverability of those savings. So it is quite right, as the report indicated, and has been referenced in Cabinet reports and the narrative at Cabinet, that in broad terms, the 18 million plus some of the savings for the following year have been identified. The question was not the identification. The question at this phase is the robustness of the ability to deliver those savings. The Council, as has been commented by several members this evening, has a poor record of delivering on the identified savings that it's had in previous years. Its principal reason for its failure in delivering on those savings has been its lack of business case development. In other words, the robust analysis of the opportunities that have been identified. So the identification of the 18 million has been drawn from a range of inputs, both from officers of the council, from different departments, PwC, and indeed other advisors. Those opportunities have to be tested to a substantial amount to ensure that, that should the council agree them, that we're capable of delivering them in the way and the manner we've indicated through the discussions, through the budget discussions. Technically, what they amount to is a series of outline business cases and then full business cases. The role of PwC is twofold, and I appreciate there may have been some confusion about this. The specific quantifiable amount of money that that's identified in the report, the recurring 5 million or so that PwC have been working on, is identified because they are actually doing that business case, specifically themselves, in conjunction with officers, but they're leading it. And the reason they're leading that particular business case is because it's the most complex one. It's the one that cuts across the whole council, dealing with our business processes from the first point of contact with the customer right through the delivery of the service. There is no capability in this organisation to do that type of analysis and the development of that business case. However, PwC are also working with the business cases that the officers of the council have been asked to develop, which amount to the rest of the 18 million plus some of the savings for subsequent years. And the work that PwC are doing on those business cases is to test them, frankly, to destruction, to ensure that those business cases stand up to the question of, are they deliverable? Will they deliver the level of savings that have been identified at the outset? That gives us a level of assurance that the proposals that set off as opportunities are in fact deliverable. Of course, those business cases, all of them, will be available to members as part of the scrutiny process. So members will have the full opportunity to see those business cases and indeed test the robustness of them themselves. So PwC's role is far wider than simply the 5 million. That's the bit it's easily quantifiable. And their capability we're relying on in able to test the work that officers are doing on business cases, most of whom have very little experience in doing that level of detailed analysis around the deliverability of the case. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Councillor Polly, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. In the previous item, we heard about due diligence, and I mean, this is something that we must apply across all aspects of the council. With PwC, how robustly have we looked at their past history with other authorities, the delivery of their services and then implementation? I mean, if I read that report correctly, the sum of 800,000 is to help identify 5.2 million, but that's not, it's not a case of that's a fee for delivering those savings. If they're tasked with looking at us with a holistic approach, which is something this council, I think, we can all agree on, hasn't been good at doing in the past. People work in silos within this council. There doesn't seem to be that holistic approach to things, and sometimes you very much need an outside body to sort of look at you and the way you function. Surely that it can only be a good thing in that we're getting an external source to, a bit like overview and scrutiny. We challenge things. We've gone to other agencies, haven't we? Like the Council for Good Governance, for PAS. We're reviewing all of our systems and we acknowledge where we've got our strengths and where we can be supported. And if we're asking for peer reviews in other departments, we acknowledge that we didn't have the acumen within our financial department to deliver on the investment policy, and that's why we are where we are. So I think this is more a case of learning from lessons that we've already been through. I think it is in keeping with the BVI that we are acknowledging that where we need help. And can I just Am I right in what I'm saying? That figure doesn't stop at 5.2 million. It could be that PwC deliver, I don't know, 10 million for the same sum. Would that be right in that assumption?
Yeah, Dr. Smith.
I think Councillor Polly makes an excellent observation, and she's absolutely correct in an approach. The advantage to us, beyond simply the 5 million or the 80 million or the 24 million or the 75 million over the 5 years, in order to achieve that in a way that minimises the impact on frontline services and optimises the opportunity to make the savings through other measures, then the challenge for the council was, first of all, that we've had no experience of doing that. So as a council, in the years where savings have been found, they're small in number compared with the challenge now, and they've almost entirely been simply allocated to the individual directorates proportionately, and they've been told to find the money. If we were to do that in that way, which the council has got experience of doing, it would disproportionately impact on those services to the most vulnerable and the ones for which we have the highest levels of statutory responsibility. So broadly speaking, 11 million of the 18 million would need to come from adults and children's services. That's neither, I would argue, neither desirable or practical. So in order to find other ways to do this, we needed to draw on two things. Firstly, and this is to your point, Councillor Polly, to ensure that we're drawing on experience of how this has been done in other authorities with significant challenges, which clearly PwC have in spades. They've worked in numerous councils with huge challenges for which they have the ability and experience of helping that council to deliver. Secondly, they bring with it a level and detail of benchmarking that gives us insight into how we compare in our spend in different aspects of our work compared with comparable councils, which also gives us views about where we might find savings and still be consistent with where other councils are. And then thirdly, as I said before, they bring skill and ability in analytical skills and ability and data handling that gives us a strong evidence base to establish with some confidence that even in the most complex actions we take, that we can deliver them. And it's the accumulation of that capability that we're drawing upon. The only point where I would slightly give a different emphasis to your point, Councillor Polly, is that PwC are not taking the responsibility for the work. They're doing the analysis, they're checking and challenging our own work, and then it has to be adopted by officers of the council as officer recommendations to the members through the proper process that the council will go through at the budget setting, both in ONS and obviously in the executive. So with that slight nuance that they're working with us rather than on us, you're absolutely correct in your assumptions.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Councillor Spate.
Thank you. First and foremost, in response to what Councillor Snell said, I need to make this quite clear. I have the greatest respect for a significant number of officers within this authority. And the gentleman concerned, Mr. Mayor, personally knows what respect I have got for some of the authorities in this, some of the officers in the authority, including himself. He stands very high in my regard, as do a number of other senior officers. I do think there are a number of incompetent councillors. I also think there have been some incompetent officers. And so does the cabinet member that sat across me, because his cabinet has approved the sacking of some of them. So, you know, I just need to make that quite clear. There is a balance to commentary on the performance of people, and we have some exceptional officers. And if you'd like to interrogate my email, you'll see that to be the case, that I have complimented them on their work. On a broader issues, I'm absolutely confused now this evening. You're quite right. We do need detail. We do need depth of assessment. We do need deep analysis of everything that we do. But it's all, and you say, oh, you seem to think there are easy answers, there are this, that, and the other. Well, I can assure you that senior financial officers at Section 114 level could look at Thurrock and say, I could cut that with a stroke of a pen. And of course they can't. They need the help and the depth of the expertise that is available to us. But what absolutely confuses me is this evening that 3 gentlemen across the other side of this chamber have all said, and Councillor Snell was quite specific in that he said, PwC have been with us right through this. So PwC, you've all accepted, have been involved in the process, and I presume that that didn't just start after the ONS meeting the other night. We're going back 14 months when this awful state of affairs first began to manifest itself. Now, I can't find a financial track record that we paid PwC, but that may just be my incompetence as an investigator. What I do respect is the fact that 3 senior members of this council, the portfolio holder for finance, the Section 115 officer, and the CEO commissioner, have all said that PwC have been involved with this council for a substantial period of time. That's what you said. But yet, I go back to Cabinet when you said we've got a very poorly resourced finance team. Well, our PwC, who you've admitted are in place, not part of that resource for the finance team, please explain to me how you want to say one thing 1 minute because it backs your argument, and then you completely deny it other because it's against my argument. I'm just completely baffled with the doublespeak about PwC. Have they been with us? Have they not been with us? You know, I absolutely get that we need the expertise. I absolutely get, as Dr. Smith very cleverly said, we need to test these things to destruction. We cannot afford the same sort of incompetence that the previous administration got us into. We certainly can't. But I am just left utterly perplexed and baffled by the fact that you say one thing, but then you can't substantiate it, you can't back it up. And all I'm asking you to do is to go back as a cabinet to say, have we really asked all the questions? Have we analysed what we do? What has been the role of PwC to date? Because clearly there has been a role. Are they therefore the right people to go through the next few months, years, decades, whatever it is? Because you've said this evening that they are already part of a very poorly resourced finance team. You've said it, not me. I just do not get it. And the problem is, no, I'm asking the questions, and I'm an angry councillor, and I'm one of a couple of handful of independents, and I don't really matter, and I'm an idiot and a loudmouth, and all the other things that you want to say, and most of them are probably true. But I'll tell you what I am. I'm reasonably articulate. I've spent 45 years asking very good questions, questions that this council entrusted me to help find some of its new senior people for the last 2 days, when I gave up 2 days' work to contribute to it. So if my opinion is valued then by senior officers of this council, how can you be so dismissive of it and just bluster it off? I'm appalled and I'm extremely confused. And this should go back to Cabinet and they should ask all the questions that I've just outlined.
Thank you very much, Councillor Spate. So, Councillor Snell.
I think it could be semantics, but when I talk about we, I talk about the council, and indeed they have been poorly resourced. So that's aside, whatever resources we bring in to help, I suppose that's maybe my not describing it correctly, is that the officers that we have here in the council, when I refer to our, that's all I'm referring to, the council, our officers, and they have been poorly resourced. And PwC, yes, they've been doing various jobs throughout the council. As I say, I think they even predate what they do. They predate my time here as portfolio holder. So, you know, I did you the courtesy of listening to you, Councillor Spate, and I'm attempting to explain what I mean. So I'm always referring to us as the council. So maybe that's me sort of not making myself clear. But in terms of what PwC have been doing, I'm responsible for making decisions on various policy things that come through. The day-to-day running of things, I'll leave that to Steve or Dr. Dave to answer on what PwC have been doing up to now.
Thank you, and I I sincerely apologise to Councillor Spate if I've caused him any confusion over this, and about the previous involvement of PwC, and I'll do my very best to clarify this, and I'd refer everybody to page the blurred the numbers, page 24, paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6 of the report, because that sets out the previous involvement that we've had with PwC. I can't comment obviously on any involvement PwC have had in the distant past. What I can refer you to is that the work that PwC have been doing with us on the budget and the operating model for the council was commissioned by us in its first phase, which is referred to in 3.5, on an 8-week focus, and the deliverables are set out in paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6 of the work that they were doing. That first phase was the stage where, in essence, to take out some of the lingo in this, was essentially doing creating the options and helping us to create the thinking around the new operating model that allies with the budget proposals, and thirdly begins to identify the resources the council will need to develop, both in capacity and capability, to deal with its own issues going forward. So that was the first phase. The second phase, which is this proposal as it stands now, that was taken to Cabinet, was to continue that work and move into the operational side, which was the things I was outlining to you earlier, which is having created this plan that dealt with the budget, dealt with the operating model, dealt with the capacity and skills the council needs to grow for itself, to turn that into the how do we do it together. And that's the second piece of work that was the proposal that went to Cabinet. I hope that provides some, but obviously happy to further elaborate if that will help, Chair.
Yeah, it does help, Dr. Smith, and thank you for that. I still remain confused on two things. One, that information is there. It was presented to Cabinet on the Wednesday evening, and it's clearly very important. In fact, it's massively important. It's also very informative. Can you explain why it wasn't presented to ONS on the Thursday previously? That's one question. And the second question is, can you explain, as has been said by Councillor Snell, that they've been there for a long time, and we've not actually defined a timescale, but can you explain why there is no record of any payment by this authority to PwC, certainly in this calendar year?
Apologies, Councillor Spate, I missed the last part of the question. Would you just mind repeating that?
Sorry, yes, I said it, well, you got the first part, and the second part was, it's generally agreed now and recognised and applauded by me. Don't get me wrong, we need all the help we can get. But PwC have clearly been working for this authority for some time, at some depth, and they ain't a cheap organisation, we all know that. And I just wondered why there appears to be no financial record at all of us actually paying for this service, because that's what adds to the confusion. And I bring that into the context of openness, transparency, and honesty. We promised we'd get to see everything. Now, I've not got a problem, personally, with you bringing in, or the council, I say we as a council, bringing in expertise. If we have to pay double the rate to get really good officers, I've got not a problem with that. I really don't, because you pay by results. But I'm just astonished why, as I say, I don't understand why this information was not put before ONS, this committee, on the Thursday evening, because it was clearly all there and in the domain. Why it was kept a secret, I don't know. I'd like to know why. I'm sure committee members would like to know why they weren't told. And as I say, I'd just like to know, you know, have we actually paid PwC? Or they're doing us a big favour and doing all this for nothing, in which case I'll buy some shares in their company.
Regrettably, they're not doing it for nothing now. The lack of payments on the payment system will simply because they haven't billed the council in time to receive the payment. So we're not trying to hold anything back. It's simply a process issue. And as you will see, the bills when they go through. On the openness and transparency, that's why the information is in here. We're absolutely trying to be open and transparent, as I hope we've demonstrated in the other papers we've brought to Cabinet and Council on the whole raft of financial changes that are going on and the whole raft of divestments, which are very significant, and that's a fairly comprehensive and open and transparent paper, I would suggest. And this is meant to be likewise. We tried to demonstrate the rationale, we tried to demonstrate the options, we didn't just choose them, we looked at, should it be them, should it be market driven, should it be hybrid, should it be internal, external, etc. In terms of the scrutiny meeting, we were simply responding to the question, because the key point is that no matter what PwC do to help us, we have to own this. It's only going to work if we as officers and members own this and drive this forward. So we were responding to the comment where the council in the round is always us, no matter who our contractors are, and we were simply responding to that question. We're not trying to hide anything. I categorically assure you of that, not trying to hide anything at all. Hence, we've put the information in the report as we've tried to demonstrate tonight.
Very quickly, please.
Yeah, very quickly, and it'll be my last utterance. I thank you for your answers. I'm not sure I'm 150% convinced, but I do respect what you say, and I will look into things further. But I just hope, and my hope above hope is that as we haven't actually had an invoice from PwC for work that they've already done, I hope we have at least budgeted for it, because we're going to be in an even worse place than we already are.
Yes, we have budgeted for it. The council made provision in the budget you set on the 1st of March, and that is where the money will come from.
Okay. Councillor Worrell, please.
Thanks. Right, I don't even know where to start now, because I kind of feel like we're having a conversation that's quite not about the paper and why it was called in the first place. I kind of feel like we've gone on to the next few years and sorting out the budget for the next few years, when it was clear that the executive summary is saying that we need to spend this money to get to the budget in February. And why I supported this call-in is not only did I ask Councillor Snell once if he'd found the money, and he said very nearly, I actually double-checked twice that, you know, the budgets were there, and it just feels like a lot of money to be asking. So you take away PwC come February next year. I absolutely know how dire it is here, and we need to have that help. But we was assured that this year's budgets were pretty much there. Now, I think the problems are deep-rooted in this council, but it's not like we haven't done it before, because between 2010 and 2016, we found £64 million worth of savings under a Labour administration. So it's not that we can't, I just think it's some are refusing. And that is the biggest thing for me, because I've even had a cabinet member say to me, well, if we just don't find it, the officers will have to find it. Well, that officers having to find it is now going to cost us £1 million. And that is just not acceptable. I just think that we shouldn't be bringing PwC in for the first year's round of savings. We should have been able to find that. We've got scrutiny in this month, actually, where we're expecting to see, line by line with business cases, enough decisions for us to agree February's budget. And if PwC needed to come in that urgently, we're now 2 weeks down the line. If we send it back to Cabinet, we're a month down the line. They needed to be starting within the next day. And I do believe that this paper was written when we went to scrutiny. I think that this paper probably had a dry signature on it by the time we went to scrutiny, and you could have been really honest and said, we're still not there. I am still really worried. We're going to have to call some extra resource in. And that honesty would have stopped this tonight. I think it is about being open, honest and transparent and giving us that stuff. We've already months down the line behind where we thought we would be with the scrutiny process. And I can see that we're going to end up having arguments because we've not got on top of this quick enough. And I am just so worried. And I do realise that PwC are going to come in. I just didn't expect them to come in just a couple of months. And it's littered through here that this is to find February's budget savings, not next year's. I get the reoccurring savings. And it does say, and Dr. Dave did allude to it on page, I don't know what page you sent us to now, 24, that, you know, they've been here doing work on the budgets and the transformation programme. But just above it, it also says that they've been there looking at revenue savings. So they have been doing work. You know, so I am concerned that they've already been doing this. And I know I've spoke to cabinet members. We was here till 11 o'clock last night trying to find these savings. They've got to dig deeper. They've got to dig deeper because we can't keep paying £1 million for 20 days' work. And they haven't got a guarantee that they found it. They're coming in to have a look because that's what the paper said. They're going to come in and have a look. And I'm just so worried. And we can't say it's about next year when we have to have this call-in on the information on what we called it in on. And the information wasn't about finding it for the next few years. It was about we need them to come in to get us to February. And it says again, and I keep hearing it, oh, don't worry about it, it's coming out the transformation budget. You know, we've got £12 million in there. We're spending that money like we're taking chocolate buttons out of a packet. You know, it's real money. It's real millions of pounds. You know, for the cuts that we're finding, we're just saying, oh, take that out of the transformation budget. Oh, where's that coming from? Oh, that's coming out the transformation budget. You know, I just feel like we're just spending it, but this is real money, and this is we just have to have these honest conversations. And I am really worried that we've got them in too early and that we didn't make people dig deep enough. Yes, we've got them in, I understand that, but you want them in to do more. And I'm not sure that we should be having them in at this point. I think that those cabinet members should have been made to work because there is stuff in there. If you haven't made no savings since 2016, which in the BVI it said really shy of making savings, the previous administration, then there must be stuff in there.
Thank you.
For them to find it.
Thank you, Councillor Wall. Anyone like to respond to any of Councillor Wall's points? It's up to you. No? Yeah. Would you like to, Dr. Smith?
I'd certainly like to respond on the point about the purpose again. Again, I would draw members' attentions to page 26, paragraph 3.9, which summarises the role and the relationship between PwC and the council in the proposed work to do, which starts from the agreement that the Cabinet reached to the contract through to next February. And it's not the identification of the savings. I just repeat that point to be clear. That in that sense, those things have been identified primarily by officers, but with the support of PwC in the first phase. In this phase, it is about the business cases. It is about helping us to set up our own functions, particularly through a programme management office, that can carry forward the deliverability of, can deliver the savings once agreed, so that we're not dependent on expensive external consultants beyond February next year. So they can help us to transition to that stage that they introduce some tools to the council that help us further challenge ourselves around our productivity and things that we can do to improve our position. So again, it's set out, and not go through the whole report, but the report does identify the way in which we wanted to use this next period with PwC, essentially to ground the opportunities that have already been identified and to ensure that we're creating the capability within the organisation so we don't rely on that expensive external support beyond this proposed contract.
Thank you very much. Next is Councillor Polly.
Thank you very much, Chair. Local government, public sector compared to private sector, which PwC are, very different animals, very different timescales. Demand, at the moment, I understand there was something today that 1 in 10 local authorities may be on the verge of bankruptcy throughout the country. Therefore, PwC are going to be in demand. You know, they're already in place with us. Is there any consideration to that factor on the urgency that we needed to? Sorry, they didn't answer none of my questions. Oh, sorry. My apologies, Chair. Sorry.
No, are there any, which specific questions do you want Councillor Snell to answer, Councillor Wall?
Well, I'd just like him to tell us why one day he tells us that they're there and the next day they're not. You know, and I asked him twice. I just wonder how we got there and why he didn't. And I did ask this, why he didn't tell us that there was a paper going to Cabinet within a week. It must have been agreed and the signatures dried, and didn't tell us in that Cabinet meeting when he was saying we're nearly there, that he was actually 5 million adrift. I mean, nearly there. 5 million adrift is not nearly there.
Councillor Snell, please, and we'll come back to you, Councillor Polly.
I mean, for being pedantic, as you well know, that a cabinet decision on operational matters like this doesn't need to go to INS. It just doesn't have to. We have decided from now on in that these sort of things will go to INS, but that hadn't been determined at that particular point. But in actual fact, it has worked the correct way because you guys called it in, which is obviously the right thing to do, and we're having this discussion today. So, you know, in the end, we get to the position where we probably should have been to start off with. So, you know, that's me being pedantic, and you know, in future, as we've already heard earlier on today, that's going to be different moving forward. You seem to be sort of conflating, not conflating, but so the 5.2, it's not an amount of money that needs to be identified. It's part of the 18.2 that we needed to identify. They've come in to identify that amount of money of that sort of saving. Now, at that particular point, that I can't say for definite, but I think that was part of the savings we've already identified. But we had to obviously point out that they've come in to identify that kind of level of saving. In fact, I think it's going to be over the period more like £9 million ultimately. So I think there's another £4 million to be identified for the following year as well. But you know, I can see where it's coming from. You think, well, if I've already said we've nearly got to the 18.2, where's the 5.2 coming from? But that's rolled into that saving already. And I think, again, communication and the way it's been written perhaps isn't as clear as it could be. And I think we should maybe take that forward as a recommendation for improving that going forwards, because I do agree it tends to get a little bit lost in translation. So, yeah, it's not an additional 5.2, it's part of the savings we were already making anyway.
Is this related to the
Yeah, just to add, coming back on one point. So the paper's written focusing on 24-25 because clearly we have to set a budget as a council and that's the imperative. But we do reference in the financial implications that we're starting to build up 25-26 as well. So it's not just the figure for this year. We've challenged and we expect a full year effect of a further 4 million for 5-6. But we focus the paper on 24-25 because that's the imperative for the council to set its statutory budget.
Thank you. Councillor Parley, would you like to continue the point you were making?
That's fine. Thank you again for your chairing, because it is important that overview and scrutiny that everybody feels that they've got an equal heard voice. So, no, I welcome that, Chair. Thank you. I obviously, with my colleague, Councillor Royal, were also at that same meeting. Both herself, Councillor Maurice Cook and myself did go over that question possibly 3-4 times. Like my recollection, I thought, was that we had identified savings for this year. We were almost there for next year. I thought there was a figure, and I'm not accurate on this, I'm sure I'd have to refer to the minutes, of something like 11.7 million. No, I'm being, perhaps I was wrong. So, I don't know where, but the 5.2 million that's shown in this report, I'm not uncomfortable with, because I don't think that the portfolio holder ever alluded to the fact that we were at the 18 million for next year. I don't have that, but I do recall that you're very detailed and persistent in good scrutiny. My point was more about commercial forces, as we say, the sometimes with the timelines, with Cabinet, with getting papers to Cabinet. I mean, was there any potential that we could lose PwC if we hadn't have acted that quickly on taking that paper to Cabinet, given what I've just said, that there's one, possibly today's statistics suggesting that there was 1 in 10 councils that might be in difficulty by the end of the year?
Thank you, Councillor. I believe you're going to answer that one, Dr. Smith.
I am, with your permission, Chair, yeah. Councillor Boyd, no, I don't think there was any realistic risk to us losing PwC. The risk to us, we were going to lose the team that PwC had put in. So in the first phase, the 8-week period that I was referencing to Councillor Spate earlier, there'd been a particular team in that had worked very, obviously a lot of ability, but most importantly, they'd worked in partnership with the officers of the council. They built up an understanding of the council, both its strengths and its weaknesses, and therefore it was important to us to attempt to retain continuity in going into the proposed second phase of work. So we weren't starting with a new team who would have to get to know us again, and obviously no guarantee there was as good a team as the team that were put in the first phase. So that was it wasn't so much the company, it was the people that they put in that we were trying to, we felt was important to retain, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just come back on that. I think it's very, very important that if that team have already started to bond and gel with our officers, and that there is an element of trust in between them, especially given the fire that serving staff and elected members have come under because of our situation, it's very difficult to have someone marking your homework, isn't it, and have that good working relationship. But if there has been that sort of trust and professional relationship, I think that is supporting our officers as well in showcasing, as Councillor Spate said, some of the talent that we do have, and giving them extra resources. So thank you for your answers.
Thank you, Councillor Polly. Councillor Gledhill.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of want to touch a little bit on what's been mentioned so far about the need for the urgent item to Cabinet. It says in the report that it was going to be an ED2, which was attached to the original report, but it was brought to Cabinet. Was that ED2 done after our meeting of ONS or before? Can we recollect?
The exact dates, but we did the ED2 and then that didn't work and make its way through the... So we went to the next Cabinet meeting for all the reasons we've been describing.
So because the ED2, obviously, from what Dr. Smith has just said, it's not an urgency about the companies, it's an urgency about not only the people, but being able to continue that skill-up process for those that are here. And I'll come on to that specific bit a little bit later. But there was obviously the need for the urgency at some point to say, actually, you know what, we need to continue this, or we're not going to be able to fully deliver the next year's budget, but equally, we're not going to be able to deliver what is required of that budget. So it seems to me that, the fact there was an ED2, the information already signed, sealed, and delivered, and then someone thought, actually, let's put this out in a bit of public domain. ED2 process is quite robust. If it didn't pass the ED2 process, the next step would be Cabinet. And if there's an urgency need, it falls under the urgent requirement. So it seems to me that all of that, very dull and uninteresting process to pretty much everybody, has been applied. And if I'm wrong, please correct me now. Because it's been quite clear in the BVI that asking questions sometimes in public, unless you ask for that specific, am I wrong, you haven't asked the question. So I'm quite happy that I'm not wrong. It's already been said, I'm not going to keep on...
Would you like them to answer that specific?
Yeah, sorry.
You want it on the record, you want it on the record, don't you, whether you're right or wrong. So I think they should answer now so we can minute it.
Good evening, councillors, and thank you, Councillor Gledhill, for your question. So the ED2 was as a result of the item not being on the forward plan. So yes, it had to be processed under the urgency rules. So hopefully that clarifies the position for the ED2.
It most certainly does. Thank you.
Happy with that particular response?
That particular
That's right. Carry on.
So, just because I'm sure this will probably come back and bite us at some point somewhere, the fact it wasn't on the Cabinet plan for the forward plan, not on the overview scrutiny plan. Yeah, okay. It's only that, obviously, all of us that have read the BVI, and I know that everybody in this room has done so many, many times, one of the things that BVI mentioned was that ONS was cluttered up with everything from Cabinet. So, it's a bit of a... It's nice to see some of it coming back, and obviously this is the right process with using the call-in for this. So it's nice to see that there will be, some more of it coming back rather than it just being, let's see what happens. I must have read the report probably in the same way as Dr. Smith intended the report, or indeed different to other people. This seems to me to be a report about not just giving a man a fish, but actually teaching them to fish so they can continue to feed for the rest of their lives. This isn't about, let's make savings. Let's face it, when we took over this administration, there was however many millions of pounds worth of savings had been put forward, but we had no environment team, we had no enforcement team, we had no grass cutting equipment, we had grass up to our waist, and we had rubbish up to our ankles. So let's be honest, it's not about, we can all say we can save that money, but, and someone else mentioned it earlier, sorry, I can't remember whom, actually I think it was Councillor Spate thinking on it. Someone can come in and say, yeah, we can save you all that money, but you can save that money at the detriment of being able to deliver the savings, and those savings being at the detriment of the residents of Thurrock. And we can't escape that there will be, services that residents have got that they will no longer get, or they will get a much reduced service. That is, I think, let's be realistic on that. But this seems to me to be the right report at the right time for the right processes, now that's been clarified, to ensure that our officers are skilled up to deliver not just a budget, not just to make those numbers up, but to actually deliver the expectation within that budget that we will still have bins collected, we will still have parks cut, we will have X, Y and Z done. That's been highlighted numerous times. BVI weren't the first to notify that. I can think back to a number of other reports under previous administrations, and including the previous Conservative administrations, said that we lack the capacity to either identify the savings or deliver the savings. And I think this is the right thing to do. I've worked in local government. I've had other people come in, including PwC, to skill up people. It seems to be something that didn't really happen as well as it did here. So, answer the question. How are we going to measure the fact that after the 22 weeks, we're not going to have to extend this for another 22 weeks and another 800,000? And that our officers, not only can they write a report, but they fully understand what that report means and how they're going to deliver that, and equally, that report reflects what is going to happen coming forward. Because my concern is I've had this assurance, not only as leader, but when we've been in opposition, time and time and time again. And here we are with a Section 114 notice, and here we are discussing the same thing again.
Councillor, who's coming on this one? Dr. Smith.
I think that's a very important point that Councillor Gledhill raises. And there are a number of aspects to this. At an officer leadership level, it's imperative that in the appointment of the new senior leadership team, that there is capability within that team to both understand and lead the delivery of the budget once it's agreed. So the transfer of knowledge and understanding from PwC is linked to also the new senior leadership team and those members of the senior leadership team who obviously remain in role longer term. At a more practical delivery level, it's absolutely essential that the council has available to it a properly organised, properly capable programme office. A programme office is a vehicle for essentially enforcing, measuring, monitoring and reporting on the programme that's been agreed by the council. In this context, the programme of the budget. At the moment, the council doesn't have that. It neither has it well organised, nor does it have enough of the right constituent parts to make up that team. So part of building the capacity of the organisation is to mobilise those skills within the council that's capable of doing that job. That's both officers, so people, but it's also systems and processes, so that we have reporting tools that are alive, they're updated automatically and constantly, and that they are open and available to be scrutinised by everybody, so that the progress are being made and where the slippage that's identified and understood and acted on is information available to all those involved. So those are the parts of the instruments that we're seeking to put in place between now and the end of the contract with PwC, should the Cabinet agree that contract.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Is it related directly to...
It's more of a well-done observation. Everyone's started, has pointed out parts of the implications and so on, but literally the very last line of 7.2, PwC are the only providers in this lot, one would assume, obviously, that programme rather than a general euphemism for something. The PwC proposals offer a 10% discount from the published framework rates and would therefore represent the most economical advantageous solution. So a lot have been bandied about, again, about value for money. Well, we all understand PwC is probably one of the most expensive in the market, but we've got 10% discount. And, that's also to be applauded. But I do think, and this is not for this meeting and indeed for the recommendations, but Chair, I do think when we have our next substantial meeting that we ask at the 22-week point that we know what's happened as this committee. I think that's going to be vital to see that 800,000 has been not just well spent, but has been worth the money. So when people look on this at week 23, we're not arguing about another 800,000.
Yep, no, I think you're right there, Councillor Gledhill. We'll ask Dem Services to put it for the next, for that staging post in our meeting cycle. Thank you. Again, like the first item, a very good discussion. I think Councillor Kent and Councillor Spate really emphasised their reasoning behind the call-in, and with Councillor Kent really focusing on a disproportionate, on a disproportionate effect of this, and looking to our own officers and our own members to find the initial savings. And Councillor Spate rightly brought up the point about the speed in which this went through Cabinet, and both Councillor Kent and Councillor Spate have reminded this meeting of things that were said at the previous Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which in a way contradicted the need for this urgent decision in the first place. Councillor Snell, thank you for your sort of comments and for responding to the questions, and talking about the need for the resource and you know, your reasoning behind it. To be obviously, and I think Councillor Polly and Councillor Gledhill, I think I'm right in thinking you're against the proposal, so that there isn't a consensus in the room. And with Councillor Polly talking about what we could learn from PricewaterhouseCoopers, the whole idea of the holistic versus the silo working, and Councillor Gledhill some specific questions around the need for this urgent decision and ultimately supporting bringing in PricewaterhouseCoopers. And Councillor Worrell quite rightly brought us back to being specific to this calling and her reasons for that. My own personal view is I support, as just an ordinary voting member of this committee, I support recommendation 1.1 because I think the one thing that both Councillor Kent and Councillor Spate put in their calling that they have aligned is the consistency with the budget setting approach. And as Councillor Kent's timeline really helped to show that the stages of the months that led, if you know, we're getting there, and then October, we need an urgent decision so PwC can start working over the weekend, in essence, you know. And I was in that meeting as well, where the assurances were made about where we are with savings, and for me, I do believe, you know, Councillor Snell has answered and said where he was coming from with those comments, but I think there's enough of a concern for me to personally back 1.1 that this goes back to Cabinet in line with the concerns and views and some of the positive comments as well, but in line with the concerns of this committee. So if everyone's okay, we can move to the vote. Okay? Did you indicate? Yeah.
I do apologise because I said I wouldn't speak, but I think I have an important point to make, and I'm grateful for the indulgence of allowing me to make it. There are 3 recommendations before committee this evening, and it may be a benefit to my colleagues, and it may be a benefit to Cabinet if it goes to them. If I could ask Dr. Smith for an honest opinion, the third alternative, or the second alternative, is to take it to full council, which obviously will be at the end of the month, which is another few weeks down the way. My fear that if members considered that option, it might be damaging to the council's recovery plan. So I would just like to ask an expert opinion. If not for me, it's irrelevant to me because I don't have to make a decision. But I would, for clarity, I think it would be very helpful if Dr. Smith could say whether it would be damaging, because we do not universally, whether we have other differences, none of us want to be damaging to our recovery plan. I just thought I had to make that point.
No, you're entitled to my indulgence as well, because yourself and Councillor Kent were good enough to bring this call in, so I think it's only fair. And obviously, Dr. Smith, we'll only go to 1.2 if 1.1 fell, but if you could specifically answer Councillor Spate's point, that would be really helpful.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Spate. It would be very damaging, to be absolutely frank and honest. Why do I say that? Because there's 2 impacts that immediately spring to my mind. One is that we won't be able to progress to the budget proposal process with the robustness of the business cases that we need to have and that you need to be able to see and interrogate, which will either leave us with a dilemma that we go with an incomplete budget proposal or we go with a budget proposal with incomplete information and advice. And I wouldn't recommend to you to do that. The second thing that that I feel immediately springs to mind that would be an impact, raised in the context of Councillor Polly's contribution earlier, we would certainly lose the team that have been working with us. And even if after council there was an agreement to go forward, we simply would be back to almost to week one of the work we were doing. And I would really urge you to avoid that if at all possible.
Is that okay for clarity, Councillor Spate? Yep, thank you. Okay, so I will read out recommendation 1.1. I'll only read the other two if this one falls, okay? So the committee can either, if it is concerned about the original decision in light of the call-ins, refer the recommendation, bracket, urgent cabinet decision, resources to support the council's budget process, bracket, to cabinet for reconsideration, setting out in writing the nature of its concerns. Could all members who are in favour of recommendation 1.1 please raise their hand? Thank you. Have you recorded that? Could members who are against recommendation 1.1 please raise their hand? Thank you. So that's a tie at 3-3. So using the chair's casting vote, I'm going to vote for recommendation 1.1, and so that's the recommendation. Can I thank you, though? Yeah.
And I beg your indulgence on this. As part of the overview and scrutiny process, if there isn't consensus, those without the consensus are entitled to put a minority report in. And I would like to make clear that I intend to put a minority report in and would ask that sufficient resources be given under the Constitution to help and assist me with that.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And thank you for bringing that up. And just before I close, I just want to thank you for the robust but well-mannered debate that we had, and I think it was really helpful. So this concludes the business of the meeting, and I now declare the meeting closed at 9:06. Thank you, everyone.